I want to tell you a story about Jack and Jill, these two adorable 3-year-old twins. So one night before bed, Jack and Jill hear this really great story about a man who built a space shuttle. And the story takes them through the whole process of building a space shuttle and all the adventures the man has as he flies his space shuttle to the surrounding planets. And you know how sometimes when little kids hear a story and they become obsessed with it, and they have to hear it over and over and over again? Well, this is what happened with Jack and Jill and this story. They demanded to hear it every night before bed, and they had what seemed like hundreds of questions about everything to do with outer space and building space shuttles. So it wasn't a surprise when a few days later, Jack ran up to his mom and he said, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut like the man in the story." And Jill said, "Me too, I want to build space shuttles." So technically, what they're referring to as astronauts are actually aerospace engineers, because aerospace engineers are the ones who build space shuttles. But at age 3, Jack and Jill don't know that yet, and neither does their mother. But don't worry, she's going to learn. So Jack and Jill's mom says, "You know what, guys? That's really great. If you have this dream in a few years, you're going to learn all the skills you need to make this come true in school when you're older." But she's wrong. Jack and Jill don't have to wait until they're older. They can take the first step towards becoming aerospace engineers now, at the age of 3. Actually, they could have started taking this first step even before the age of 3. This step that I'm referring to is developing something called spatial skills. Spatial skills are the building blocks needed to do well in STEM, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. Many children miss out on developing these skills early on because people don't know about them. In our country, there's currently a lack of students and teachers pursuing STEM careers. Yet today, we face some of our greatest STEM-related challenges. So missing out on the foundation to succeed in STEM is a very big issue. So what are spatial skills? Instead of telling you, I want to show you. So hopefully this looks familiar to most of you. This is a game of Tetris. And the name of the game is to rotate the shapes as they fall to fit into any gaps you have, hopefully at the bottom of your screen. So that ability to look at the shapes and figure out how you need to rotate it to fit into a space you have, that's an example of using spatial skills. Parallel parking. When you're trying to envision how much space your car takes up and how you have to manipulate it to fit in between the other two cars, that ability to envision how much space your car takes up in relation to 2 other objects, that's an example of using spatial skills. And finally, if you've ever taken any kind of IQ or aptitude test, you may have seen a question like this. So this question is asking you to figure out how you can manipulate that pattern to match one of the answer choices underneath. So I'll give you a few seconds to see if you can figure out what the right answer is. Okay, so the correct answer is D. And one way you could have arrived at that answer was to look at the pattern and mentally fold it in your mind's eye to match the shapes you see in the answer choices. And then you have to figure out what orientation of that shape was correct to match the right answer choice. So that ability to think 3-dimensionally and to rotate that shape in your mind's eye, that is an example of using spatial skills. So when I say spatial skills, that's what I mean. I mean that ability to mentally rotate a shape and understand what it's going to look like after that rotation. I mean that ability to understand how much space an object takes up in relation to other objects, and I mean that ability to think 3-dimensionally. These skills start developing only a few weeks after you're born. And I said before that Jack and Jill could have started developing these skills even before the age of 3. So what does that mean? What could that look like? Well, there are certain activities that have been shown to help with spatial skill development. Activities like playing with blocks, puzzles, and Legos, teaching your children the names of 3D shapes, and exposing them to spatial language words. So right now, all of you are sitting across from me. This screen is behind me, and these pillars over here behind the stage are next to me. Those words, across, behind, and next to, are spatial language words, and they're used to describe an object's position in space. Spatial language words help a child develop spatial skills. Nora Newcomb and Andrea Frick, who are 2 experts in cognitive development, which is the field of study that spatial skills fall under, have published research connecting strong spatial skills to later success in STEM. So what I'm trying to say is that all of these things are connected. Spatial language words help a child develop spatial skills. Spatial skills help a child understand basic math and science concepts, and those concepts are needed to succeed in STEM. As with most things in life, some kids are just going to be naturally good at this. They're going to be able to think spatially without really seeming to try. But for the rest of us, it takes early exposure and practice. Exposing children to spatial language words isn't hard. You can take anything around your house and teach your child the meaning of these words. For example, ask your child to point to an object next to your computer and see if she knows where to point. Look at the positive effect this can have later on if you start this kind of activity early in a child's life. And when I say that, I don't mean that doing all of these things with your children is going to automatically make him or her an aerospace engineer like Jack and Jill dream of being. What I am saying is that without these first steps, your child may not develop the foundation needed to succeed in STEM. So we learned that spatial skills start developing early in life, and we just learned that strong spatial skills are connected to success in STEM. So you would think that in a country where there's a lack of students and teachers pursuing STEM careers, that these skills would be taught in early education, right? Well, they barely are. I say barely because there aren't really any spatial skill lesson plans like there are for math and reading. Teachers don't come into the class and say, okay, class, today we're going to learn how to mentally rotate an object in our head. And from an early educational viewpoint, there have only been attempts made in the last year to start bringing spatial thinking into the classroom starting at the kindergarten level through the Common Core standards. But the Common Core isn't used everywhere. And even with these standards, it's still hard for teachers to gauge if a student understands these concepts before the student moves to the next grade. And remember, we're talking about kindergartners. But spatial skills start developing a few weeks after birth. So what about preschoolers? And I'm not the only one that's noticed this problem. In the Journal of Mathematics Teacher Education, Douglas Clements and Julie Sarama acknowledged the lack of geometry and spatial thinking in early education. So what's the big deal? Maybe kids are learning this stuff at home, right? What I discovered from talking to parents is that many parents did not know what spatial skills were. And of course, that doesn't represent all parents, but I became very interested in that fact, that some parents didn't know. So then I thought to myself, who else should know about this? I thought doctors, pediatricians must know something. And even though I tried to keep convincing myself that that was true, I just had this nagging feeling that I should check. So I did the only thing that made sense to me in order to figure this out. I pretended I had a 3-year-old daughter, and I called some local doctors. I told them I want to bring my daughter in to have her spatial abilities tested. I think they may be underdeveloped. And these are some of the responses I got. What are spatial skills? Next call, what do you mean by spatial skills? And my personal favorite, please hold. So again, I'm sure this doesn't represent all doctors, and please hold was actually the most helpful phone call because the person that answered the phone came back and said, you need to speak to our occupational therapist. But just think about that for a second. Some parents didn't know, some doctors didn't know, but occupational therapists seem to know something, possibly indicating that something has to be wrong in a child's spatial development process for it to be noticed. So all of this showed me that it seemed like children weren't being properly exposed to spatial skill development activities in the home, or at school. So how does all this affect me, and how do I know all this about spatial skills? Well, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not a preschooler, I'm not a kindergartner, I'm not an expert in cognitive development. What I am is an entrepreneur who discovered a problem that directly affected me. And in an effort to create a solution to that problem, I tried to learn everything I could about spatial skills. I read published research articles, became very familiar with the Spatial Intelligence Learning Center, which is an entire online platform dedicated to spatial learning. I talked to experts in the field, and I met with educators. This affects me because I'm an engineer who struggled spatially to complete my engineering program. I had a class that required taking a 2D drawing and transforming it into a 3D object on a computer. So this is an example of the type of work I had to do. I would only be given the drawings you see, and I would have to look at those and figure out how to create the final 3D model. I had a lot of trouble with this class, and no matter how hard I worked to improve, I was the last one in the class every single week because I had to stay after the class ended so the teacher could help me one-on-one. And this is a prime example of how spatial thinking appears in the engineering curriculum. And this type of thinking appears again and again. In high-level calculus, you have to measure the dimensions of 3D shapes. In chemistry, you have to envision the reaction between molecules. In high-level physics, you have to understand the direction of magnetic fields, and the list goes on. At least once a week during my sophomore year, I thought about switching majors. I didn't know why I was having such a hard time. I just kept thinking, am I not smart enough to do this? Am I not cut out for this? Did I pick the wrong major? But looking back now, I can see that part of the reason that I struggled was because my spatial skills were underdeveloped. I want to help other kids avoid the spatial challenges I had by helping them develop their spatial skills at an earlier age. And I'm working on a product to do just that. You can improve spatial capabilities with practice, but you can't practice what you haven't started. We need to change that because today we're facing some of our greatest STEM-related challenges. We need more STEM workers to help us tackle those hard-to-solve problems. To prepare the next generation to pursue STEM, if they choose that path, we have to address spatial skill development at an earlier age. Whether it's in school or at home, you have the ability to make a difference in the lives of your children by encouraging spatial learning. And you can do this by playing with blocks, puzzles, and Legos. And if you don't have those materials, be resourceful. Make your own puzzles out of paper. Take apart a pen. See if your child can envision how the pieces should fit back together. Expose the children in your life to spatial language words, like across, behind, and next to, because these are the building blocks needed to succeed in STEM. Help your sons and daughters, your nieces and nephews, and your grandchildren to develop the foundation to succeed in STEM so that if, like Jack and Jill, they come to you and say, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. I want to build space shuttles. First, you can correct them and say, no, no. If you want to build space shuttles, you want to be an aerospace engineer, not an astronaut. And after that, you'll know exactly what to do to help them get started. Thank you. Thank you.